Most people who have studied the Civil War in one way, shape, or form have come across the name of James Longstreet. Now, who exactly was he? James Titus Longstreet was born in South Carolina in 1821, and eventually he went on to be enrolled in West Point Military Academy in 1838. And while he was there, the very next year, he would cross paths with a young man who was, quite frankly, there against his will. He didn't want to go. His father dragged him up there, kicking and screaming. That young man's name was Ulysses Grant. The two would go on to become fast friends. After the time in West Point, they would go on to be stationed in the same area of around St. Louis. The two would always be together, connected at the hip, you could say. And during the Mexican War, Longstreet would serve under both Scott and Grant, and under Scott and Taylor, and he would go on to be severely wounded in the Battle of Chapultepec. And in 1861, which the decision that so many Southerners faced when his home states were seceding from the Union, Longstreet had to make the choice, and so he wound up resigning his commission in the U.S. Army, and he had offered his services to his home state, and he kind of hoped that he would be put as a paymaster, some kind of a desk clerk, something that he thought that that's where his skills were, and he thought that's where he should be. To his surprise, he was immediately made a brigadier general and put in charge of a group of Virginia soldiers and sent straight to the front in the Battle of First Manassas, or First Bull Run. And he would serve under Joe Johnston. And he didn't really shine too well under Joe Johnston, but what he did do is under his next commander, Robert E. Lee, in the 7 Days battle, he actually was well known for taking the fight and pushing it to the Union troops, and he became very well known as a tenacious fighter in the 7 Days battle. Now, what happened was Lee had a choice to make because he was reorganizing his army into two corps systems, two major groups of army. And his two ranking soldiers were James Longstreet and Stonewall Jackson. Unfortunately for Jackson, he made a poor showing at 7 Days. He was a tenacious fighter, but he didn't really do much during the battle. He kind of sat back saying, if Lee wants me to fight, he'll call me up. He didn't do much, where Longstreet did a great deal of the fighting himself. And some think is as punishment to Jackson, he was actually given a smaller group of men in the Second Corps, and Longstreet got the bigger group. And so what also would happen just before then, there was a horrible scarlet fever outbreak in Richmond earlier that winter. And within a matter of 1 week, Longstreet would bury 3 of his children. 3 of them would pass away. In fact, they would be so distraught, him and his wife Louise, that a good friend of his, General George Pickett, and his girlfriend, LaSalle Corbell, would actually take it upon them to make the funeral arrangements and take care of the affair. So needless to say, Longstreet, when he came back to the army, he began burying himself in his work. There was a visible change in the man. I mean, how can one bury 3 of their children and not have a major change in them? Where a lot of ways he was jovial, and if there was a card game, he couldn't stay out of it. He was having a great time. He didn't do any of that when he came back. He was much more serious, much more sullen. Some actually called him gloomy. And so that's what happened with that situation. And he was away during he buried himself into his work, and he'd fight tenaciously in the Battle of Second Manassas, Antietam, and Fredericksburg. And he wasn't present during the Battle of Chancellorsville because his army was sent south to forage. And so he came back with the knowledge that General Jackson had been killed, and they rearranged the entire army again. And he was told by Lee that they were going to be doing an invasion of the North, which he was, how shall we say, a little bit against. Jackson was well known for diving right in, doing exactly what Lee said, where it could be said that Longstreet took more of the devil's advocate approach and showed him the opposite side of the planet, fought a little more conservatively. So that was the situation that was facing James Longstreet in the spring of 1863. More on that to come.